Okay, so thanks for joining us today, everybody. Let's get underway. The focus of today's webinar is on the increasing cyber threat to SAP applications and what you can do about it. Hopefully you've attended one of our webinars before, but if you're new to Turnkey, just a quick intro. So we help SAP customers worldwide manage business risks, and we specialize in areas such as governance, risk and compliance, identity management, application security and cyber security. We run these regular key insight sessions to help SAP customers understand today's threats and hopefully help you become better prepared. So today's session will focus on cybersecurity and specifically relating to SAP landscapes. I'm now going to hand you over to Richard, who is the Managing Director at Turnkey, who'll be running today's session. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Craig. So today I'm going to be talking about the increasing cyber threat to SAP and what you can do about it. The way I'm going to break the session down initially, I'm just going to talk about the problem and just to sort of explain why I feel or why we feel the cyber threat to SAP is increasing. And then we're going to talk about some practical ways to go about improving your risk management of that issue. In terms of an introduction to end-to-end security for SAP, which is something that we've pioneered within Turnkey in terms of approaching security for an SAP environment in a unique way. And then we're going to move beyond segregation of duties monitoring and talk about some of the things that you can do practically around your SAP landscape and your SAP application to do more than the standard segregation of duties monitoring that a lot of people, a lot of companies are doing. Just a brief introduction to myself. I started my career at PwC, working in the SAP security and controls practice. And that was about 20 odd years ago now. And one thing that I noticed over my career working in this area, I set Turnkey up 15 years ago now, is that the focus of people's attention was very much on managing insider threats, managing fraud within the organization, managing traditional business risk in the finance process around the SAP application, with very little attention placed on managing SAP from an external threat perspective. I don't think people, when I first started working in SAP, perceived there to be much of a threat externally to the SAP environment. And I do think that has changed, and we need to change our thinking around this. We need to change our focus, our attention, where we invest our efforts and where we invest our money around managing those threats as they have evolved, basically. So just thinking about the increasing cyber threat to SAP. So the first thing I wanted to do was just flag a recent threat that's been identified last month, 10K Blaze. Lots of publicity around that. It was highlighted by Onapsis, a flaw in SAP code that can be resolved with patching and some modifications to your SAP gateway. But it's a good example of the fact that there is research out there, and increasingly we're identifying risks to SAP environments that are potentially being exploited by nefarious actors, basically. And I think the risk generally to the enterprise is increasing exponentially. It's not just about your SAP environment. The risks to your applications and to your from an IT perspective are known to be increasing significantly, and there are a number of reasons for that. We're seeing an increase in cyber attacks. The sophistication of those cyber attacks is increasing as well. At the same time, you've got lots of risks to non-compliance to various different legislations coming out. For example, GDPR. The type of information that cyber attacks is going after is changing as well. Data has a value to it, and you're finding that a lot of those cyber attacks are looking for data that they can then exploit subsequently. So data breaches are playing quite an important part in those cyber attacks. And then obviously there are various other risks that we've been tackling for a while in terms of internal fraud, in terms of the accuracy of our financial statements, the political and environmental environment, Actually, that political and environmental environment is also playing a factor in the increasing cyber risk. I think we're seeing more evidence of state-sponsored attacks on SAP and on, well, certainly on applications, certainly on customers' environments. And I don't think it's too much of a leap of faith to say that does put the SAP environment at additional risk as well, and potentially those external attacks from a state-sponsored attack could well be on your SAP environment. I think we're also seeing an unprecedented growth in data breaches. This is just a nice way of visualizing that, but we can see here that the size of data breaches and the volume of data breaches in the last sort of 10 years or so has increased significantly. And those data breaches are also hitting the press. They have the pervasiveness of the press and the availability of information is meaning that when a data breach does occur, it's having a much higher impact on brand reputation, etc. When we do see those breaches occur, when we do see cyber attacks hitting the press, the availability of information and the speed at which that becomes available to customers and consumers means that the impact of those breaches can be significant on brand reputation, etc. And specifically in the SAP environment, we're also seeing reasons why that is an increased threat to SAP. There are a number of things and factors within the way that things have changed in SAP that are increasing that risk at the moment. We're seeing an increased complexity and interconnectivity of the SAP landscape. Things like Solution Manager provide great tools to manage and administer an SAP environment, but connecting all those systems up intrinsically increases the risk. It gives you more places to attack your crown jewels, your production data, from potentially jumping in from a development environment, an obscure one perhaps you didn't realize was a threat. So the interconnectivity of those systems is increasing the threat. Customers are understandably opening up their supply chain to their vendors and partners, etc., in order to manage, suppliers and partners, in order to manage their stock, etc., and to improve workflows within business, improve efficiency, etc. But as a result, what you're finding is that means that you've got more entry points to your SAP environment. You're creating a larger attack surface for external attacks. And actually, if you use that Google link down there, I'm not going to go through that right now, but if you try that, you get about 10,000 results. That is an open portal where you could attempt to type in a user ID and password and potentially, as a result, get into the SAP environment that you're surfacing there. And that's because a lot of people are creating SAP portals that they're making available to their suppliers, etc. In addition to that, we've got a web-based presentation layer, an HTML5 interface, again, creating an improved user experience, but at the same time, creating an easier attack surface. And then you've got the BYOD trend as well, which again creates problems because your workforce is expecting to be able to work and access your environments, access the SAP systems that they need to access from various devices that may not have the same endpoint security as in the past, when you had full control over the devices they were accessing, etc. And in addition to that, we've got a more cloud-based model generally. We're putting all of our hosting, etc., out into the cloud. In some respects, that increases security sometimes because you get more focus and attention on security around cloud-based applications. But it does increase the ability of people to attempt to attack those environments because they are out there and available for anyone to access from anywhere a lot of the time. And we're seeing that the SAP have responded to that significantly. So around sort of 2009, 2010, SAP started releasing security notes on every other Tuesday. They call that Patch Tuesday in the same sort of way as Microsoft do. And it's been interesting highlighting that to customers in sessions that I've run out in the community in the SAP world. I think the patching strategy that customers operate in a Microsoft environment is quite well honed, and a lot of the time there's a good process behind operating or reviewing patches and applying those in the Microsoft environment on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the SAP community. It's reasonably recent, but not that recent that we started receiving these patches. But at the same time, the application of those patches and the rigor around the process for patch management in an SAP environment is not, in most circumstances, as robust as it is in the Microsoft world. And I think we need to up our game in the SAP community on that front, because ultimately the threat to SAP is increasing at the same sort of rate. So I think it does, and what's behind that, the data inside of your SAP environment, be under no illusion, that's critical data for virtually every company running an SAP system. The information inside that system is going to be important data. What can we do about that? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is a concept that we've developed at Turnkey, that we call end-to-end security for SAP. Some time ago, we identified this as a problem that a lot of SAP security teams are only really focusing on roles and authorizations. And in order to secure an SAP environment, there's actually a lot more that you need to do to secure that environment. And a lot of it isn't roles and authorizations. Access controls are an important part of securing an SAP system, but there's a hell of a lot more that needs to be done to ensure that that system is secure and to reduce the risk of a vulnerability. So we came up with a concept of secure practices, secure layers, and secure people. And it's the same sort of way that you approach a lot of these problems with people, process, technology. But we're looking at those and breaking them down to understand what we can do about what needs to be done in each of those areas in order to improve your security posture in your SAP environment and manage the risk of external threats. So just thinking about people first, what do we need to do there? Well, we need to think about the right governance processes, having the right people involved, taking the right interest in security at the senior management level, surfacing the right information to senior management so that they can demonstrate their interest and so that they can ask the right questions and push the organization as a whole to treat security seriously. In parallel with that, we need to think about training. We need to get the right those people who are going to be involved in that governance process at all levels, understanding their role in the process, and ensuring that people have an empowered approach to security, so they actually feel that they have a role to play in it and understand their role in managing security. A lot of this stuff is more broad than SAP, and I think an important point to make around how we feel SAP should be approached is that we need to start embracing the IT security community more, and we need to start thinking about SAP as another application. Yes, it does have some specializations in it. Yes, it does have some important aspects of security that need to be treated differently, and some technical expertise that needs to be applied that is specific to SAP. But all of the things that you do from an information security perspective and you do properly across your enterprise also need to apply to SAP. And that training, part of that is general security awareness, but also making sure that people in SAP understand that it applies to them too. And that sort of shared responsibility, ensuring that people from top to bottom in the company appreciate that they have a role to play in managing security, appreciate that they take ownership and responsibility of the things that they're responsible for, that concept of throwing things over the fence for someone else to deal with someone else's problem, and just getting that cultural piece right around security, really, where people understand their role and understand the importance of that role in it. Secure practices, from a process perspective, obviously, we need to start thinking about the the parts of our business processes that are going to improve security. So we need to get the policies and standards right. We need to take corporate level policies, those information security policies that may have been defined by the information security team at the top level, and we need to bring those down into the SAP world to bring them to life, to give meaning to a higher level control statement in a policy around information security, and define that in an SAP environment to be the correct settings that need to be made, perhaps for password complexity and things like that. And we need to interpret those higher level information security policies and standards and bring them to bear on the SAP environment in a way that is practical and pragmatic. We need to think about identity and access management. And inherent in that is the management of privilege as well, higher level privileges that your administrators have, etc. Top to bottom in an SAP environment, we need to think in that respect of managing privilege at the database and operating system level as well. A lot of the time we focus on the SAP application, and essentially if you're not securing the database and operating system that sits underneath that properly, then you're building your house on quicksand, if you like. So you need to secure that system top to bottom, and we need to get identity and access management right within that environment as well. Again, embracing the wider information security approach to this. Perhaps we can use the same tools across your enterprise rather than having to do things specific to SAP all the time. Or often I find the best approach is a hybrid where you're using the SAP tools to manage the SAP specific things like segregation of duties, etc. But you're linking those back into an identity and access management solution that goes across the enterprise. So that's the identity and access management piece, and obviously that also permeates down to getting the right roles and authorizations in place as well. Secure development. This is an important one. I think a lot of code that's been developed by third parties and by customers themselves doesn't necessarily pay due attention to the right security that needs to go into that code. There are a number of vulnerabilities that you can introduce through weak code or poor code. You might perhaps not put the right company code checks into a program. You've developed it, you might put a transaction code on it, but you haven't put the checks for a company code into it. So you're increasing your exposure of a data breach, or you're potentially breaking some of the business processes you put in place around security. But worse still, you might introduce the ability for a denial of service attack in there. You might have people putting clear passwords directly into code. You might have something called cross-site scripting or other vulnerabilities that give an attacker somewhere a weak point to approach. So you need to think about how to get your code secure, basically. And then in your change management processes, you need to make sure that you have the right points at which security is considered. So there should be a security impact assessment in your changes to understand whether those changes are going to introduce any form of security impacts. And also, intrinsic in that, and they can be tied together, is this concept of privacy by design that the recent GDPR legislation introduced. So we need to start thinking about introducing that sort of privacy and security impact assessment as part of your change management procedures. And then I talked earlier about patching. SAP are releasing new security patches every other Tuesday. Every customer should be reviewing those patches when they come out and determining whether some of them are important enough to pull forwards and be applied immediately, or whether those are going to wait for the next natural support pack that your technical team are going to be applying at whatever date in time. That's a kind of broad focus on the secure practices we need to be thinking about. And then finally, security layers. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, that your database and operating system underneath your SAP system also need to be carefully managed, and the privilege on those systems needs to be secured. What this is about really is recognizing that an SAP environment is more than just the application itself. So as I said, a lot of the time SAP security teams are only looking at the roles and authorizations in the SAP environment. But in actual fact, to secure that SAP environment properly, we need to do a lot more. We need to harden the SAP application itself, making sure that all the parameter settings that need to be in place are properly set. We need to ensure that the database and operating system are properly secured. We need to ensure that the SAP gateway is properly secured. We need to look at the network topography and make sure that we're not creating links to systems that are unnecessary and therefore increasing that attack surface for somebody. We need to look at the infrastructure, potentially monitoring that for attacks to SAP, etc. So there's quite a lot more to do than just the application itself. You shouldn't be daunted by this, because actually, if you start to engage properly with your information security team, they have a view on a lot of this stuff already. The bit that they don't get is the application security in SAP. But a lot of the time, how to secure the front end, how to secure database, operating system, the infrastructure, etc. They may be doing something about that already for your SAP environment, but if they're not, they're probably doing it for other parts of the organization and maybe have left SAP to the SAP team. Like I'm saying, we need to start embracing their world a bit more and meeting in the middle in terms of ensuring that we're properly securing these systems top to bottom. Next thing I'm going to talk about is what I've described as moving beyond segregation of duties monitoring. I just want to have a think here about how we currently protect our SAP assets. And what I'm going to talk about is the things you can do with SAP standard, and then how you can move beyond that to get towards good practice, or what might be considered best practice. So I think an important point to make when we talk about that is this is going to be dependent on your risk profile as an organization, as to how far you're going to want to go towards the top end of the things you might be able to do in terms of best practice. I don't really like that term. I prefer good practice, but the point being that there's a maturity curve here for each of these areas, and you need to decide as an organization where you're going to sit on that maturity curve in terms of your target, because obviously going further out that maturity curve is going to cost more. And as an organization, every organization will have a risk appetite and a level at which they're prepared to invest in security. I would argue as a security professional that everybody is underinvesting, but at the same time, there are lots of other moving parts to every organization and every customer's business. And if you make tractors, you're probably going to spend a bit less on IT security than if you make fighters and fighter jets and military equipment. So there's going to be a middle ground between those two perhaps extremes for every organization, and we need to work out where your organization sits from a risk appetite perspective and how you're going to tackle that. So I'm just going to start going through each of those four areas one by one. So segregation of duties and sensitive access monitoring. Although we need to move beyond that, we do need to do that still. It's a critical part of managing the risk of managing your security risk in an SAP environment, and that is why it's the area that most companies have done something about. So in terms of achievable with SAP standard, well, SAP have a tool called GRC access controls, but it doesn't come as standard. You have to buy it as a bolt-on. Without GRC access controls, I'll be honest, it's very difficult to get segregation of duties right and sensitive access monitoring right without some sort of tool. But there are things you can do to improve your position. So, for example, you can monitor some sensitive access scenarios using standard reporting, using the security reporting transaction SUIM, or you can do you can use the security optimization service as well, and that can help you move some ways forwards. And that you can also ensure that your role design that you've built in the first place supports good business decisions. So if you've got a solid role design that doesn't change very much, and you build a role-based segregation of duties matrix, then theoretically, if your roles don't change, you're not going to introduce a huge amount of additional risk when you allocate those roles in the combinations that you've defined as being okay. In reality, most customers find it difficult to achieve that level of stability with their role design and do introduce risk into their roles, which is why they need a tool of some sort. But having a role design that supports good business decisions that people understand within the business and allows those business users who are making approval decisions to understand the question, whether you should have this access or not, is going to really improve your position from a segregation duties perspective. What you should do in terms of moving beyond that and improving, you should be considering a tool, as I said, to monitor segregation duties and sensitive access. Customers with Sarbanes-Oxley regulatory requirements, if they're listed to the SEC in the US, for example, really can't get away without having this technology in place and having those tools in place. We also need to think about managing privilege, so that management of privileged access, top to bottom as well, as I said. So within the SAP environment itself, the GRC tool will allow you to do emergency access management with the tool with GRC. But then also on the database and operating system level, you need to start looking at products like One Identity Safeguard, things like CyberArk, things like Beyond Trust, to manage access, privileged access at that lower level. And then moving beyond that, we can start to integrate the process controls capabilities of GRC to really improve your user access management processes, build proper mitigation controls into that and the monitoring of those mitigating controls, and be able to demonstrate those mitigating controls are operating. And again, there's also another tool that you might want to consider called Access Violation Management, which allows you to extend the analysis of security allows you to extend the analysis of segregation of duties to include actual risk violations. So where those segregation of duties have occurred, and it goes right down to the detail of whether somebody has actually executed a transaction to create a vendor that they have then subsequently paid the exact same vendor. So within the standard GRC tool, you can see whether someone's created a vendor and paid a vendor, but you can't see which vendor that was. Access Violation Management will allow you to do that, to really go to that detail. So thinking about application security monitoring now, this is where we've got a whole raft of settings and things that we've put in place to manage the SAP environment itself from an application security perspective, all your parameter settings that relate to security, etc., password complexity, the ability to open and close the production system for change, those sorts of things. With SAP Standard, you can do more than most customers are doing with Solution Manager. It's got a config validation capability and then the security optimization service as well. Those things can really help you to monitor some of these settings and create alerts when those settings are deficient. As I said earlier, you can monitor sensitive authorizations using that SOS as well. And then you can do CCMS reporting of various security events as well. What you might want to consider in terms of going beyond that, extending the scope of your exception monitoring, looking at exception monitoring at the database and operating system, for example, integration with your GRC access controls and risk management tools. So looking at kind of tying those products together to manage risk top to bottom, and utilizing the process controls capability of GRC and the workflow capability of that to demonstrate the control effectiveness in this space. So, where you've got exceptions, if you're highlighting exceptions through solution manager exception, etc., really all you're doing is passively telling somebody something's wrong. You're not forcing the issue over what happens to that. Whereas within process controls, you're actually surfacing those issues, and at the same time, having surfaced those issues, you're forcing a remediation plan to be created, and that gets escalated if it's not being executed, etc. So the next thing we need to consider is infrastructure and event monitoring. As before, there is a little bit that's achievable with SAP standard. So we can think about using the solution manager system here again. The config validation capabilities can do some things, and the security optimization service again is useful in that regard. But really, if you want to do infrastructure and event monitoring properly, you need to start thinking about some of the tooling that's available. Firstly, the SAP tool enterprise threat detection has been created for this sort of purpose to help you manage patterns within the SAP environment and match those to patterns outside of SAP as well. So that's one of the sort of capabilities you can apply. Synapsis and Virtual Forge have been creating some really strong tools in this space. The 10K Blaze threat that I highlighted earlier was identified by Synapsis, and one of the strong things about using, I think, an external party in this regard is they are actually researching for new threats, and I think that's something that is worth considering when you think about these things, because you do want really to be able to get that sort of zero-day protection, to get that heads up from somebody who's doing the research before a threat becomes public. So that, and the other aspect of that from an Synapsis perspective is that you're looking at the network traffic. So there's quite a lot of tools out there that can monitor network traffic. But I think, again, what's important here is to think about the content that you're monitoring for. So if you don't know what you need to look for, i.e. the threat signatures that might be within those data packets, then you're going to miss a lot of things that might be relevant from an SAP perspective, but your tool didn't know they were, as it were. And that's why I think kind of combining the capability of monitoring network traffic with the research is quite a powerful sort of offering. We then come to things around sort of security incident and event monitoring and integrating some of these tools with that data. And then sort of general monitoring and testing of your environment as well, ensuring that you get those, the right testing in place for when you're applying patches and things like that. One thing to consider here as well, obviously, is that, again, your SAP environment isn't just about the SAP aspect of that stack. You need to think about the database and operating system underneath that as well. Obviously, if you're running SAP HANA, then some of the SAP standard tools will do certain things for SAP, but you still need to think about the OS and DB element in most environments, because not everybody's on HANA yet. And then finally, if we start thinking about software lifecycle security, again, with SAP standard, there's some things you can do here. Solution Manager can help you with your patch management, understanding what levels you're at, understanding what patches are available, and ensuring that you apply those, etc., and consistently across the environment as well. SOS and Early Watch, again, will help you with understanding the SAP notes available and reporting on that. And then Charm within Solution Manager will also help you from a change management perspective as well. And then SAP have actually developed a code inspector tool, which allows you to do at least basic level analysis of ABAP code for authorization checks. You can go beyond that basic code inspector with the sort of Virtual Forge tool that's part of the Synapsis suite now, that will allow you to do code analysis at a more detailed level. It also builds in some automated fixes as well. And again, that kind of research that backs that is quite important in that regard, because you're you're looking for new vulnerabilities all the time when you're scanning your code. I think an important part of this point to make, or important point to make on software lifecycle security, is that you need to get your vendors and your suppliers into a place where they have a contractual obligation to deliver you secure code, and that's quite important. You know, I think a lot of the time third parties are creating code on behalf of organizations, and unless you specifically make it part of their obligations to deliver secure code in that regard and set the standard as to what secure code means, then I think you're definitely at risk of not knowing that you have issues within that code. So I think I've probably talked to this point already, but as I said, SAP itself have a number of products in this area, but there are a number of complementary products in all of these areas that are worth considering. I think I've mentioned most of the key ones throughout the presentation, really, but it's just worth considering that aspect of things as well. So just to wrap up, I think there are sort of 5 things to take home from this, really. I think number one, a really important point, really, there are great sort of things you can do here, lots of bells and whistles to implement and buy. But actually, there's a lot of basics that most customers don't do, addressing audit points that keep coming up, ensuring that your role design has been remediated, ensuring that the security settings that have been highlighted as deficient by your external audit have been corrected. All those points are going towards hardening your SAP environment and getting a better position for you. And if you do nothing else, kind of tackling those top things that are highlighted in the audit every year, making sure that your privilege management in SAP is done properly and you've got support roles that reflect what people need day to day without giving them SAP all those things are really important still from a security perspective when it comes to cyber threats. Considering the risks in your non-production environment as well. So I think a lot of the time people focus on the production environment, but if you had somebody attacking your SAP environment, it's more than likely they would think about getting into the dev or QA systems where they know they can get access to wider privileges quicker, and then hopefully from their perspective leaping into your production system from there. So it's important that you think about the connectivity in that environment, reducing the number of the amount of connectivity where it's needed, and also just considering those risks in that broader SAP environment rather than just focusing everything on production. Ensuring that you've got robust security patching processes in place. We talked about that, but I think, you know, every other Tuesday SAP have got these patches coming out, and not very many customers are doing a great job of reviewing those and applying them where they're important. Ensuring that you develop secure coding standards and holding your suppliers contractually accountable for following that. And then finally, broadening the term SAP security within your organization and starting to connect that function with the wider IT and cyber security teams and the initiatives that they're running, and learning from each other, getting all those good practices that they're operating into the way that you tackle SAP, and making sure that you really are securing SAP as opposed to just having an SAP security team.
Thanks, Richard. That was really useful. A great overview there. So just before we wrap up today, if cybersecurity is a key concern for you, then our webinar on enterprise threat detection would be of interest. We'll be joined by Paul Lloyd-Smith from SAP, and the session will cover the use cases for enterprise threat detection and how it can be deployed to monitor threats, identify potential security patterns, and send alerts. So depending on when you're watching this webinar is available as a live session, which you can join on the 20th of June. If it's now later than that, you can find the on-demand version in our resource library on our website, which is at turnkeyconsulting.com/key resources. There's also a number of other resources that you can find on cybersecurity on the website. So we've done other guest webinars with Anapsys and also Virtual Forge, one of which includes 5 ways to hack your SAP system with Virtual Forge. So do be sure to check out those resources as well. But that's it for today. Thanks again to you, Richard, and thanks to you for joining us. We do hope to see you again soon.